Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Julien, and I will present my work on robust data-driven decision making uh, with a particular emphasis on application in healthcare. This is joint work with my advisors, Carri and Vineet Goyal from the Iowa Department and Columbia Business School, as well as Gabriel Escobar from Kaiser Permanente. So the goal in this poster is to find sequential decision-making policies, but with an emphasis on a robust decision. In particular, in most applications, we'll estimate some parameters about the model, and then we will take our decision based on these parameters. And what we want is a decision that is robust in the likely errors that we have in these parameters. So we start with some motivation. You see, for instance, that you can model the treatment of a patient with a sequential decision-making process. So we have the state of the patient, which are, for instance, the blood pressure, the blood sugar level, etc. So just some covariates. You can take some decisions, such as drug dosage. You have some uncertainty on the realization of your treatment, and then the patient will transition to another state at the next period of time, and then you will start again with taking some decision. Okay, so we call a strategy or a policy pie is just a map which in a given state tells you which action you should choose. So for instance, a treatment. And there are some parameters called the transitions, which are model the dynamics of the health evolution of the patient. So when a patient is in a given state, take some action, what is the likelihood that the patient will have another state at the next period of time. And the goal is to maximize the reward, and usually you tune the reward so that it's a proxy for the survival rate of the patient. And of course, the reward, so the survival rate, depends on the transition dynamics. And fundamentally, the transition dynamics are influenced by some common underlying factors, such as the demographics and the history of past disease of the patient. Okay, so in this talk, we are concerned with parameter certainty. So in particular, you can try to estimate the transition rates across different health states for your patients. So the likelihood of some kind of evolution for the health of the patient, given some treatment. But you have some errors, right? You will never manage to have a complete accurate description of the health of the patient. And on the top of that, this is just a model, right? So the health evolution of the patient is likely slightly different. So we take a robust approach where we consider an uncertainty set, which means that we consider a set which models every single possible realization of the parameter. So think of it as the set of patients that I'm willing to consider as plausible, given the observation that I have. And our goal is to find a policy that maximizes the worst case survival rate among all patients that I consider plausible. So this is this minimization program here. Okay, so we care about that because in healthcare, usually you have very noisy data and you may not have enough so as to get obtain the exact description that you want. And in previous work, the uncertainty is the way that the uncertainty is modeled is very conservative. Essentially, every single parameter can vary independently, even though they have some common underlying um, um, dependency, because we think of modeling the health of the patient, and again, this should depend on like comorbidities and history of past disease. So it's not something that is unrelated. It models a real biological phenomenon. So our model, in a nutshell, relies on decomposing the transition probabilities PSA on some common underlying basis W. And really here, the intuition is that some common underlying factors, the vectors W, are influencing the dynamics. And these underlying factors are like the comorbidities and the past disease of the patients. We're able to estimate some confidence intervals for the factors based on the confidence intervals for the transition matrix. And we're able to compute, this is in the efficient algorithm section here, we're able to compute an optimal robust policy. So we are able to compute a policy that maximizes the worst case survival rate of the patient across all plausible patients. Here I want to emphasize that there is some contribution on the theoretical side here, because we are able to propose a model that is significantly less conservative because it models dependency across parameters compared to previous approaches. and it remains tractable. So we made some applications on the problem of proactive transfer to the intensive care unit. We have some data set from Kaiser Permanente with about 300,000 patient trajectories. So we see what happens for 300,000 patients in the hospital, and when they were in their ED and when they were transferred to the intensive care unit, and we have some risk score, which summarizes like all the physiological condition of your patient to just one number. Think of it as the SOFA score, for instance, which is a proxy for mortality of the patient. And so we have this sequence of scores, and we have the treatment, which are to transfer the patient or not. And we want to know, should you proactively transfer the patient before they actually require it to the ICU, so that you obtain a better survival rate overall, because they will have more intense care. Of course, if you do that and you are too aggressive, you will end up with a congestion ICU, which can be a problem. Okay, so the goal is to optimize for this trade-off between mortality, ICU occupancy, and length of stay of the patient. But first, we are able to derive some theoretical guarantees on the proactive transfer policy because of our model. So we can show that a nominal and so a naive policy that does not take into account the parameter of uncertainty, and the robust policy, which take into account this minimization problem on the worst case, are both threshold policy, which means that they choose a certain risk score, so a certain risk level for the patient, and proactively transfer all patients above that risk score. Okay, so they are pretty interpretable, and we are one of the first paper to prove optimal some structure on the optimal robust policy. Additionally, we can compare it to the nominal policy and show that the robust policies transfer more patients than the nominal one. Using the data set, we're able to make some simulations and estimate the mortality rate versus the average ICU occupancy. So what we do on the left-hand side here is that we have the nominal curve, which is, I can zoom in here. Okay. So in this plot, we compare the mortality and the ICU occupancy of the threshold policy. So if each of these points on this curve is a threshold policy, so we see that here we have a high hospital mortality but a low ICU occupancy, which means that we do not transfer any patients. And then we start to proactively transfer more patients, and we are able to decrease the mortality at the price of increasing the ICU occupancy. And then, so this is for the nominal parameters. If you sample at random parameters around this nominal estimation, you obtain more or less the same thing. And these deviations are tiny. It's about like 10 to the minus 4. Whereas if you consider adversarial deviation, like here, you are for 3 types of adversarial deviation. So what I call U mean, U empirical, and USA. Think of it as very tiny deviation around the nominal parameter. The mortality rate can blow up compared to the nominal one. And so the performances are super unstable. Okay, and so we are able to show that you should consider the worst case here, and the optimal robust policy, you will take it, you will choose it as regards to those curve, so 1, 2, and 3, which model the worst case mortalities compared to the naive one, which is the blue curve, which only consider the nominal survival rates. So I'm happy to discuss that more at length during the discussion room, and more information can be found on at my website, which is at the bottom of this page, www.columbia.edu till JG3728. So thanks for coming to this session, and I hope to see you around.